Everything arrives for a reason. Buddhist reflections for inner calm. Life often feels like a stream of chaotic events that appear random and beyond our control. We encounter joys and sorrows, beginnings and endings, friendships and partings, and in each moment the mind seeks an explanation, a cause, a reason. Buddhism invites us to look deeper into this stream of existence and recognize that nothing truly happens without a context. Every encounter, every challenge, every triumph and every disappointment arises within the web of interdependence that binds all phenomena together. To understand that everything arrives for a reason is not merely to cling to a simplistic notion of destiny, but rather to embrace a profound vision of cause and effect, karma and impermanence. The teaching does not promise that we will always understand the reason right away. Sometimes clarity dawns only after years of reflection, meditation, and self-exploration. At other times, the meaning of an experience is not found in the event itself, but in the transformation it produces within us. The suffering that once seemed unbearable may become the source of wisdom, compassion, and resilience. The joy that once appeared fleeting may open the heart to gratitude that endures. In this journey of Buddhist reflection, the recognition that everything arrives for a reason becomes a gateway to inner calm. It allows us to soften the restless desire to control and predict. It encourages us to accept with equanimity what unfolds. And it awakens in us a curiosity toward the mystery of existence, a curiosity that replaces despair with openness and resistance with flow. The following reflections will explore 5 vast and interwoven domains of this principle. Each will unfold as a deep river of thought and practice, moving through the core Buddhist teachings of impermanence, karma, mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. The intention is not to provide neat answers, but to offer a path of contemplation where inner calm naturally blossoms, the dance of impermanence and the arrival of every moment. Impermanence is the heart of the Buddhist vision. It is the truth that every phenomenon is in a constant state of arising and passing away. Nothing stays fixed. Even the mountains erode, even the stars burn out, even our thoughts and emotions shift from moment to moment. In understanding impermanence, we begin to grasp why everything arrives when it does, and why it departs when the time is right. When we experience joy, we often cling to it, hoping it will stay forever. Yet it fades, as all things must. When we suffer, we often despair, believing that pain will last endlessly. Yet it too dissolves, sometimes quietly, sometimes suddenly. Impermanence teaches us to recognize that the timing of events in our lives is inseparable from this ceaseless rhythm of change. The arrival of each experience has its season, and within that season lies the possibility of learning and awakening. Consider the story of the Buddha himself. Born into luxury, he was shielded from the realities of sickness, aging, and death. Yet inevitably, impermanence revealed itself. He saw the old man, the sick man, and the corpse. These encounters arrived at precise moments, shaking his protected existence and opening the door to his quest for liberation. If they had not arrived when they did, perhaps his awakening would have been delayed or obscured. This illustrates the subtle teaching that even the timing of what we encounter has a role to play in the unfolding of wisdom. Impermanence also liberates us from despair. When grief visits, we may ask, why now? The Buddhist path does not offer a simplistic answer, but it does assure us that grief too will pass. Everything that arrives will eventually leave, just as every wave on the ocean rises and then subsides. Knowing this, we can bear the unbearable with patience. We can sit with sorrow, not as prisoners, but as witnesses, aware that even sorrow carries seeds of transformation. The mind often rebels against impermanence. It wants permanence, stability, control. We cling to youth, to relationships, to possessions, to identities. But impermanence gently reminds us that clinging is futile. The leaf must fall, the child must grow, the day must turn into night. To resist this truth is to create suffering. To accept it is to discover peace. This acceptance does not mean passivity. It means engaging fully with the present, honoring what arrives, and letting go when it departs. It means recognizing that the fleeting nature of life makes it precious. A flower that never fades would not move us. It is precisely because it blossoms and withers that we treasure it. A moment with a loved one is sacred because it cannot be repeated. Meditation becomes the practice of embracing impermanence. As we sit and observe the breath, thoughts arise and pass, emotions surface and dissolve, sensations flicker and vanish. With each observation, we see impermanence at work, not as a distant philosophy, but as an immediate reality. Slowly, the fear of change softens. We come to trust the flow of life, understanding that every moment arrives as part of this infinite dance. There is also a deeper implication. If everything is impermanent, then nothing can define us absolutely. Our failures are not eternal. Our achievements are not final. Identity itself is fluid. This recognition allows us to hold life more lightly. When difficulties come, we know they are temporary. When blessings come, we know they are gifts to be savored, not possessions to be hoarded. Through impermanence, we see that everything arrives for a reason, not always a reason we can rationalize, but a reason rooted in the ceaseless unfolding of causes and conditions. A storm arrives to nourish the soil. A loss arrives to awaken compassion. A change arrives to open new paths. The mind may resist, but the heart that embraces impermanence discovers a calm that no external circumstance can shake. And so, impermanence is not our enemy, but our teacher. It is the quiet reminder that life is dynamic, that our grief and joy, our victories and defeats, are threads in a larger tapestry. To accept impermanence is to rest in the flow of being, where inner calm arises naturally, and where we see that each moment, whether we label it good or bad, has arrived with purpose. At this point, if you are finding value in these reflections, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your presence here helps grow a community of seekers who are exploring the deeper truths of life together. By subscribing, you support the unfolding of more teachings, meditations, and reflections that can bring peace and clarity to your journey. To understand that everything arrives for a reason, Buddhism invites us to reflect not only on impermanence, but also on the law of cause and effect, which is more widely known as karma. Karma is not a system of cosmic reward or punishment, but a profound recognition that every action, every word, and every thought generates consequences. Just as a seed planted in fertile soil will eventually sprout and grow, the seeds of our deeds and intentions ripen into experiences that arrive in our lives at the appropriate time. This is not a mechanical process, nor is it governed by an external judge, but rather an expression of the natural interdependence that permeates existence. When we suffer, it is not because some deity has chosen to afflict us. When we flourish, it is not because some unseen hand has arbitrarily favored us. Both suffering and flourishing arise as the natural unfolding of countless causes and conditions, some near, some distant, some visible, some invisible. In Buddhist reflection, karma is neither fatalistic nor deterministic. It does not say that everything is preordained and that we have no freedom. Instead, it shows us that freedom exists within the web of causes. The present moment is the fruit of past actions, but at the same time, it is the seed of future realities. What arrives now may be the ripening of past seeds, but what we do with this moment becomes the planting of new seeds. Thus, every arrival is both consequence and opportunity. When joy arrives, it may reflect the fruits of kindness, generosity, or wise choices we made before. When pain arrives, it may reflect the fruits of ignorance, greed, or harmful actions that were set in motion long ago. But in both cases, the way we meet the present moment matters. If we respond to joy with gratitude and humility, we plant seeds of deeper peace. If we respond to joy with arrogance or attachment, we plant seeds of future disappointment. If we respond to pain with patience, compassion, and wisdom, we transform its meaning and create conditions for healing. If we respond to pain with bitterness or hatred, we perpetuate cycles of suffering. This understanding is crucial to cultivating inner calm. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" with an undertone of victimhood or despair, we can ask, "What seeds are ripening here, and what new seeds can I plant in how I respond?" In this way, even the most difficult experiences acquire a sense of meaning, not because they are divinely orchestrated for our punishment or trial, but because they are natural opportunities to grow in awareness. The timing of these experiences is not random either. They arrive when the conditions for their ripening are present. Just as a fruit cannot ripen until the season is right, so too do the consequences of past actions ripen when the conditions align. This insight frees us from the illusion that life is arbitrary or meaningless. Everything that arrives is part of a continuum of causes and effects, and within that continuum lies our power to cultivate wisdom. One of the common misunderstandings about karma is to think of it as linear and simplistic. If something bad happens, it must be because I did something bad. If something good happens, it must be because I did something good. Buddhism cautions us against such narrow thinking. The web of causes is vast, stretching across lifetimes, environments, relationships, and the actions of countless beings. Sometimes what we face is not only the fruit of our personal past, but also the collective karma of families, communities, or even societies. For instance, being born into a war-torn region may not be the result of a single personal action, but the accumulation of collective causes. Yet even within such conditions, the way an individual responds can transform their life and influence the future. This reminds us that while we cannot control all the causes that give rise to our circumstances, we always have agency in shaping the causes we create moving forward. The Buddha illustrated this with the metaphor of a field. Imagine life as a vast field where seeds have been sown over time. Some seeds are of joy, some of suffering, some of wisdom, some of ignorance. The rains of conditions fall, the sun of opportunities shines, and eventually certain seeds sprout. We cannot always control which seed sprouts when, but we can choose which seeds we continue to water. If anger arises, that is the sprouting of a past seed. But whether we indulge it and water it further, or meet it with mindfulness and let it wither, is up to us. If generosity arises, that too is the fruit of past seeds. By nurturing it, we strengthen its presence in our field. Thus, everything that arrives, whether anger, joy, sorrow, or peace, arrives because a seed was planted, but what happens next is our choice. This recognition is profoundly empowering. In practical life, we often encounter moments where the principle of karma is felt intuitively. Consider relationships. Sometimes we find ourselves repeatedly drawn to certain kinds of people, even if those relationships cause us pain. From a Buddhist perspective, these patterns are not coincidences, but the ripening of seeds. They arrive to reveal what remains unresolved within us. If we continue to react unconsciously, we perpetuate the cycle. If we bring awareness, compassion, and clarity, we can break free and plant new seeds. Thus, even painful relationships can be seen as teachers, arriving not to punish us, but to awaken us to patterns we must transform. Similarly, opportunities often arrive when we have cultivated the right causes. A student who diligently studies may feel that success arrives suddenly, but in truth, it is the fruit of seeds watered consistently. A person who has cultivated kindness may one day find themselves supported by others in unexpected ways. Again, this is not random luck, but the natural unfolding of karma. To see life in this way does not eliminate mystery, but it allows us to trust the process. Even when we cannot trace all the causes, we can rest assured that everything arrives within this law of interdependence. The calm that arises from this understanding is not passive resignation, but active trust. It is the recognition that what is here now is here for a reason, and our task is to meet it with the most skillful response we can. This does not mean condoning injustice or avoiding responsibility. On the contrary, it means understanding that our actions matter deeply. Every choice we make is a seed. Every word we speak plants a future. Every intention we nurture shapes the path ahead. When we understand this, life becomes a sacred garden, and our role is to tend it wisely. Karma also encourages humility and compassion toward others. When we see someone suffering, it is tempting to judge or to assume that they must have done something to deserve it. Buddhism warns us against this arrogance. The web of causes is too vast for us to comprehend fully. Instead of judgment, we are invited to respond with compassion. After all, we too are subject to impermanence and karma. The pain that arrives for another today may arrive for us tomorrow. Likewise, when we see someone flourishing, we are encouraged to rejoice rather than envy. Their happiness is the fruit of seeds they or others planted, and by rejoicing in it, we plant seeds of joy within ourselves. The most transformative aspect of karma is the way it reveals our interconnection. My actions affect not only me but also others, and the actions of others ripple into my life. This mutual influence means that everything that arrives in my life is not only about me, it reflects a collective dance of causes and conditions. The food I eat today arrives because farmers planted seeds, rains fell, merchants distributed goods, and countless hands worked. The pain I feel may be linked to patterns inherited from generations before me. The joy I experience may be connected to kindness shown by strangers I will never meet. To see this is to awaken to the vast web of life where everything is linked and nothing exists in isolation. In meditation, reflecting on karma can deepen our awareness of responsibility and choice. As we observe our thoughts, we see how anger, greed, or delusion arise, and we recognize that indulging them plants seeds for future suffering. By choosing mindfulness, patience, and compassion, we create different futures. Each breath becomes an opportunity to plant peace. Each moment of awareness becomes a turning of the wheel toward liberation. In this way, meditation is not an escape from karma, but the most direct way of engaging with it. When everything arrives for a reason, karma helps us to see that reason not as fate, but as opportunity. A difficult period may be the ripening of past seeds, but it also holds the possibility of planting seeds of wisdom. A joyful period may be the fruit of past efforts, but it also carries the responsibility to plant seeds of gratitude and generosity. This vision transforms how we live. Instead of resisting what arrives or clinging to what departs, we meet each moment as a teacher. We ask, what is this moment teaching me? What seeds are present here? What new seeds can I plant? Over time, this attitude creates a profound calm. Life no longer feels like a series of arbitrary blows or fleeting strokes of luck. It feels like a meaningful continuum in which we are active participants. We may not control all the causes, but we can always shape our response. We may not understand all the reasons, but we can trust that there are reasons, rooted in the interdependence of all things. This trust does not eliminate suffering, but it transforms suffering into a path of awakening. For those who walk the Buddhist path, this realization also points toward liberation from the cycle of birth and death itself. As long as we continue to plant seeds of craving, aversion, and ignorance, we remain bound to the wheel of samsara. But when we cultivate seeds of wisdom, compassion, and non-attachment, we move toward freedom. In this ultimate sense, everything that arrives is part of the journey toward liberation. Every joy and sorrow, every gain and loss, every meeting and parting is an invitation to see more clearly, to act more wisely, and to awaken more fully. Therefore, to live with the awareness of karma is to live with mindfulness, responsibility, and compassion. It is to see that everything that arrives in our lives, no matter how pleasant or painful, is meaningful. It is to trust that nothing is wasted, nothing is outside the web of causes, and nothing is beyond the possibility of transformation. This trust is the foundation of inner calm because it dissolves the illusion of randomness and opens the heart to the deeper flow of life. And so, let us return to the simple phrase, everything arrives for a reason. From the Buddhist perspective, this reason is not always visible, not always immediate, but always real. It is the unfolding of karma, the ripening of seeds, the expression of interdependence. To live with this understanding is to walk with calm, to meet each moment with reverence, and to plant seeds of peace for the future. If these reflections resonate with you, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you support the continuation of teachings and reflections that can nurture peace, clarity, and wisdom in your life. Together, we can cultivate a community grounded in compassion and dedicated to discovering the deeper meanings of our experiences. When we say that everything arrives for a reason, we must also recognize that how we perceive these arrivals is shaped by the quality of our attention. The same event can be experienced as a burden, a blessing, or a meaningless accident, depending on the clarity of our awareness. Buddhism emphasizes the practice of mindfulness, sati, as the key to transforming not only how we live, but also how we interpret the meaning of what unfolds. Mindfulness is not a passive observation, but an active presence, a luminous awareness that meets each moment without judgment, clinging, or aversion. Through mindfulness, we begin to see that every arrival is not random, but an opportunity to awaken, and in that awakening lies the reason. Mindfulness is often described as being fully present, but in the Buddhist tradition, it is more than simply noticing the surface of events. It is a deep, embodied presence that holds phenomena with wisdom and compassion. When we cultivate mindfulness, we slow down the restless racing of the mind, which constantly seeks to categorize experiences as good or bad, desirable or undesirable. Instead, we learn to meet what arrives with openness. If pain comes, we acknowledge it. If joy comes, we acknowledge it. If confusion comes, we acknowledge it. In doing so, we create space between the event and our habitual reactions, and in that space, meaning can emerge. Consider how often in ordinary life we move through experiences without awareness. We eat without tasting, we walk without noticing, we speak without listening, we suffer without understanding. In such moments, events may seem meaningless, disconnected, and overwhelming. Yet when we bring mindfulness to these same experiences, everything changes. The taste of food becomes an occasion for gratitude. The act of walking becomes a meditation on the body's harmony. The words of another become an invitation to compassion. Even suffering becomes a gateway to insight. Thus, mindfulness reveals the reasons hidden within the ordinary, reasons that are missed when we live on autopilot. One of the transformative aspects of mindfulness is its capacity to reveal impermanence directly. In meditation, as we sit and follow the breath, we notice that no breath is the same as the last. Each arrives, lingers, and departs. In noticing this, we see that our thoughts too arrive and depart, our emotions arise and fade, our sensations flicker and vanish. This direct perception of impermanence softens our clinging and resistance. When joy arrives, mindfulness allows us to savor it without trying to imprison it. When pain arrives, mindfulness allows us to bear it without despairing. In this way, mindfulness becomes the lens through which we see that every arrival has its reason within the unfolding of change. Mindfulness also dismantles the illusion of separation. In ordinary perception, we often experience ourselves as isolated beings encountering external events. But in mindful awareness, we see that the boundary between self and world is porous. The sound of a bird, the warmth of sunlight, the smile of a stranger, all these phenomena arise in consciousness and shape who we are. When we pay attention, we realize that everything arriving in our awareness is part of the flow of life in which we participate. The reason these things arrive is not arbitrary, but interdependent. The bird sings because the dawn has broken. The dawn breaks because the earth turns. The earth turns because of forces beyond comprehension. To notice this is to stand in awe of the vast web of existence, and in that awe we find peace. There are times, however, when what arrives is painful, and mindfulness may seem like a cruel demand to face what we would rather avoid. Yet Buddhism teaches that avoidance only deepens suffering. Pain resisted becomes anguish. Sorrow denied becomes bitterness. Fear ignored becomes panic. Mindfulness, by contrast, transforms these experiences by meeting them with gentle attention. To sit with grief, to breathe with fear, to observe anger without acting on it, these practices reveal that pain is not permanent, nor is it absolute. In the light of awareness, pain loses its power to dominate us. We begin to see its texture, its impermanence, and its role in awakening compassion. In this sense, even the arrival of suffering has a reason. It becomes the ground for cultivating resilience, empathy, and wisdom. One of the deepest insights of Buddhist mindfulness is that the mind itself creates much of the meaning of what arrives. An insult may arrive, but whether it wounds us deeply or passes like a breeze depends on the state of our awareness. A challenge may arrive, but whether it crushes us or strengthens us depends on how we meet it. A loss may arrive, but whether it becomes a source of despair or of growth depends on our capacity to hold it mindfully. This does not mean that suffering is an illusion to be dismissed. Rather, it means that suffering is shaped by perception, and perception can be trained. Through mindfulness, we train the mind to see clearly, to respond wisely, and to discover meaning even in the darkest times. The cultivation of mindfulness also extends to joy. Too often we let joy slip away unnoticed, distracted by worry or craving. We receive a kindness but fail to absorb it fully. We see beauty but are too busy to appreciate it. In this way, joy arrives but leaves without nourishing us. Mindfulness teaches us to pause, to savor, to let joy penetrate deeply into our being. When we do this, joy becomes a wellspring of strength that sustains us in times of difficulty. Thus, the reason joy arrives is not only to delight us in the moment, but also to prepare us for future challenges. Daily life offers endless opportunities to practice mindfulness. Washing dishes can be a meditation on the simple beauty of water and touch. Waiting in traffic can be a practice of patience. Listening to a child can be a practice of presence. Each of these moments arrives for a reason, to remind us that the sacred is not elsewhere but here. The problem is not that life is lacking in meaning, but that we are absent. By returning through mindfulness, we find that everything we need for awakening is already present. The Buddha described mindfulness as the path to liberation because it reveals the truth of reality. When we are mindful, we see clearly that craving leads to suffering, that impermanence permeates all things, that no self is fixed or independent. This clarity dissolves ignorance, which is the root of suffering. In this way, mindfulness is not simply a tool for stress reduction or emotional regulation, though it certainly helps with these. It is the very means by which we awaken to the truth that everything arriving in our lives is part of a path toward freedom. For example, when anger arrives, instead of reacting with aggression, mindfulness allows us to see the underlying hurt or fear. Recognizing this, we may respond with compassion rather than violence. The reason anger arrived was to reveal what needed healing. When joy arrives, mindfulness prevents us from clinging or fearing its loss. Instead, we enjoy it fully and let it go. The reason joy arrived was to remind us of the beauty of impermanence. When confusion arrives, mindfulness shows us that clarity often grows from uncertainty. The reason confusion arrived was to humble us and to invite inquiry. In each case, mindfulness transforms arrival into teaching. There is also a profound collective dimension to mindfulness. In a world filled with noise, distraction, and division, the simple act of being present becomes revolutionary. When we listen deeply to another, we affirm their dignity. When we walk mindfully on the earth, we honor its fragility. When we eat with awareness, we respect the countless beings who contributed to our nourishment. In this way, mindfulness reveals that everything arriving in our collective lives, climate change, social upheaval, technological change, also has reasons that call for awareness and wise response. By practicing mindfulness individually, we contribute to the awakening of the whole. Some may ask, if everything arrives for a reason, why must we practice mindfulness at all? The answer is that while arrivals are inevitable, their meaning is not self-evident. Without awareness, we misinterpret them, resist them, or miss them altogether. Mindfulness is the bridge between arrival and meaning. It is what allows us to see not only that things happen, but also how they fit within the fabric of awakening. Without mindfulness, suffering may embitter us. With mindfulness, suffering may ennoble us. Without mindfulness, joy may lead to attachment. With mindfulness, joy may deepen gratitude. Thus, mindfulness is what transforms the raw material of life into the wisdom of the path. Over time, the practice of mindfulness creates a shift in identity. We stop seeing ourselves as passive victims of circumstances and begin to recognize ourselves as conscious participants in the unfolding of life. We are not merely the recipients of arrivals, but also the witnesses who give them meaning. In this role, we discover a calm that is unshaken by external change. Whether storms or sunshine arrive, our awareness remains steady, luminous, and free. This is the calm that Buddhism calls equanimity, a calm rooted not in indifference, but in profound acceptance. To live with such awareness is to live with deep trust. Trust that nothing is wasted, that everything we encounter is part of the path, that even the smallest moment carries seeds of awakening. A breath, a glance, a sound, all of these arrive with reasons beyond our comprehension, yet all can be doors to insight if we meet them mindfully. In this way, life itself becomes the teacher, and mindfulness becomes the disciple's response. And so, as we continue to explore the truth that everything arrives for a reason, let us recognize that mindfulness is the key that unlocks this truth in our lived experience. Without mindfulness, life appears fragmented and arbitrary. With mindfulness, life reveals itself as meaningful and interconnected. This shift does not eliminate pain or guarantee constant joy, but it does create a foundation of inner calm that no circumstance can destroy. If you are finding these reflections meaningful, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you help cultivate a community of seekers who practice mindfulness together and share in the discovery that every moment, every breath, and every experience arrives for a reason. Your presence here is valuable, and by joining, you contribute to the growth of wisdom and compassion in the world. When we reflect on the principle that everything arrives for a reason, it is not enough to think only of impermanence, karma, or mindfulness. There is another dimension of Buddhist wisdom that reveals itself when we open the heart to compassion. Compassion, or karuna, is the natural response of the awakened heart to the recognition that suffering is universal and that all beings are interconnected. Compassion is not mere pity, which looks down from a distance, nor is it sentimental indulgence. True compassion arises when we see that the suffering of another is not separate from our own. It is the deep recognition that we breathe the same air, share the same fragility, and journey through the same impermanent existence. From this perspective, the arrivals of life, the joys, the sorrows, the challenges, the encounters, are not only for our personal growth, but also for the awakening of our ability to care for others. To understand compassion in this way is to see that every arrival in our lives is an invitation to expand the circle of our concern. When we experience loss, the reason may not be only for our own deepening, but also to make us more tender toward others who grieve. When we experience joy, The reason may be to remind us to share, to rejoice with others, rather than hoard our happiness. When we encounter someone in need, the reason may be to awaken us to generosity. Compassion teaches us that life's events are never just about the individual self. They are threads in the web of interbeing. To meet these threads with kindness is to honor the deeper reason behind their arrival. The Buddha himself embodied this truth. After his awakening under the Bodhi tree, he could have remained in blissful solitude, free from the entanglements of the world. Yet compassion compelled him to return to the marketplace, to teach, to comfort, to guide. His enlightenment was not for himself alone. It was for all beings. This illustrates a profound truth. The deepest reason behind the arrival of wisdom in our lives is to be shared. Our insight, our peace, our calm, these are not possessions to guard, but gifts to offer. In this sense, compassion is the bridge between personal awakening and collective healing. Compassion also reframes how we understand the difficulties that arrive in our lives. Too often we ask, "Why me?" as though we were singled out for misfortune. Compassion broadens the perspective. It reminds us that suffering is not unique to us, but part of the human condition. Everyone loses loved ones. Everyone faces illness, aging, and death. Everyone encounters disappointment and fear. To recognize this universality is to feel less isolated in our pain. It is also to see that the reason suffering arrives may be to awaken empathy, to connect us more deeply with others. In this way, compassion transforms suffering from a prison into a bridge. In practice, compassion is cultivated through deliberate reflection and meditation. The traditional practice of metta, or loving kindness meditation, begins with extending goodwill toward oneself, then toward loved ones, then toward neutral persons, then toward difficult persons, and finally toward all beings. This practice reveals that the heart can be trained to open beyond its habitual boundaries. When anger or resentment arrives, loving kindness meditation shows us that these too can be met with compassion. When indifference arrives, the practice awakens us to care. Thus, compassion is not only a spontaneous feeling, but also a discipline, a way of training the heart to respond to every arrival with kindness. Yet compassion is not always easy. There are times when the suffering of others feels overwhelming, when the cruelty of the world tempts us to close off in self-protection. Buddhism acknowledges this challenge, but offers equanimity as the companion of compassion. Equanimity allows us to care deeply without drowning in sorrow. It reminds us that while we cannot control all outcomes, we can always offer our presence, our intention, our kindness. In this way, compassion becomes sustainable. It is not about saving the world single-handedly, but about showing up fully in each encounter. When we smile at a stranger, when we listen without judgment, when we act with generosity, we embody compassion in tangible ways. And each of these small acts carries ripples beyond what we can see. The reason compassion arrives in our hearts is not always to produce dramatic change, but to plant seeds of healing, both in ourselves and in others. In the Buddhist tradition, compassion is inseparable from wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion can become sentimentality or burnout. Without compassion, wisdom can become cold or detached. Together, they reveal the deeper reasons behind life's arrivals. Wisdom sees impermanence, karma, and interdependence. Compassion feels the shared vulnerability and responds with care. When a difficulty arises, wisdom recognizes it as the ripening of causes. Compassion responds by alleviating suffering. When joy arises, wisdom sees its impermanence. Compassion rejoices with others. Together, they create a harmony that grounds inner calm. The relevance of compassion in daily life cannot be overstated. Every day, we encounter situations where compassion can transform meaning. A colleague may arrive at work angry, and instead of reacting defensively, we can wonder what suffering lies beneath their anger. A child may arrive with tears, and instead of dismissing them, we can offer comfort. A stranger may arrive asking for help, and instead of turning away, we can respond with generosity. Each of these arrivals has a reason, to awaken compassion within us. If we miss these opportunities, life may seem fragmented and cruel. If we embrace them, life becomes meaningful and interconnected. Compassion also teaches us to look at ourselves with gentleness. Too often we are harsh with our own failures and weaknesses. We see suffering arrive in our lives and blame ourselves excessively. Buddhism reminds us that compassion begins with oneself. To forgive ourselves, to hold our own pain with kindness, to allow ourselves to be human, these are essential steps. Without self-compassion, our care for others becomes hollow or unsustainable. Thus, when suffering arrives in our own lives, one of the reasons may be to teach us to soften toward ourselves, to extend to our own hearts the same kindness we would offer a friend. In the modern world, where competition and individualism often dominate, compassion can seem countercultural. Yet Buddhism insists that compassion is not weakness but strength. It takes courage to open the heart in a world that often wounds. It takes resilience to care when indifference is easier. And it takes wisdom to see that in caring for others, we also care for ourselves. For the suffering of others is not separate from our own. Their joy is not separate from ours. In recognizing this, we dissolve the illusion of separateness that fuels so much anxiety and fear. There is a profound calm that arises when compassion becomes our natural response. Life's arrivals no longer feel threatening or meaningless. Each encounter, each challenge, each joy becomes part of a larger story of interconnected awakening. When we meet suffering with compassion, we transform it into a pathway of connection. When we meet joy with compassion, we transform it into shared celebration. In this way, compassion infuses our lives with meaning, turning even ordinary moments into sacred opportunities. From a Buddhist perspective, compassion is not optional. It is the very essence of awakening. The Bodhisattva, the being committed to enlightenment for the sake of all beings, embodies this truth. For the Bodhisattva, everything that arrives in life is met as an opportunity to serve. Pain arrives, respond with healing. Joy arrives, respond with sharing. Injustice arrives, respond with action. Ignorance arrives, respond with teaching. This model inspires us to live not only for ourselves, but for the benefit of all. And in doing so, we find that our own inner calm deepens because our lives are aligned with the deepest currents of existence. It is not necessary to be a saint to practice compassion. Each of us can begin where we are, in small ways, with the people we encounter daily. Compassion grows through practice, just as a muscle grows through exercise. The more we cultivate it, the more natural it becomes. And the more we live with compassion, the more we see that everything arriving in our lives has a reason connected not only to our own path, but also to the paths of others. To embrace this is to live with a heart that is both tender and strong, a heart that finds peace, not in isolation, but in connection. And so when we say that everything arrives for a reason, let us remember that one of the deepest reasons is compassion. Every joy arrives to be shared. Every sorrow arrives to awaken empathy. Every encounter arrives to expand the circle of our care. Compassion transforms life from a series of random events into a meaningful journey of interconnectedness. And in that journey, inner calm blossoms, not as a fragile escape, but as a resilient presence that can face the world with courage and love. If these reflections are resonating with you, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you support the sharing of teachings and reflections that nurture compassion and wisdom in daily life. Together, we can grow a community committed to kindness, presence, and awakening, where every arrival is recognized as an opportunity for deeper connection and peace. When we reflect on the phrase, "everything arrives for a reason," we eventually arrive at the heart of Buddhist philosophy. the cultivation of wisdom, or prajna. Wisdom is not mere intellectual knowledge or the accumulation of facts. It is the deep, experiential insight into the nature of reality. It is the clear seeing of impermanence, non-self, and interdependence. It is the awakening that penetrates beyond appearances and recognizes the ultimate truth of existence. To say that everything arrives for a reason from the standpoint of wisdom is to see that each event, each encounter, and each challenge is a doorway to deeper understanding. Life itself becomes a scripture, and every moment a verse waiting to be read. Wisdom is what allows us to perceive the patterns behind the seemingly chaotic surface of life. Without wisdom, events appear random and disconnected. A misfortune seems cruel, a joy seems fleeting, a loss seems meaningless. But with wisdom, we see that these events are not isolated, but part of a greater unfolding. Wisdom allows us to understand that suffering arrives not to punish us, but to teach us the truth of impermanence and to free us from clinging. Joy arrives not to trap us in attachment, but to open our hearts to gratitude and generosity. Confusion arrives not to torment us, but to push us toward inquiry and humility. Every arrival becomes a teacher, and wisdom is the capacity to listen to its lesson. The cultivation of wisdom begins with questioning. The Buddha himself began his path by questioning the assumptions of his privileged life. He asked why suffering exists, why people age and die, why life is filled with impermanence. These questions led him to leave his palace and seek the truth. In our own lives, wisdom grows when we dare to question our habitual interpretations. When something painful arrives, instead of asking, "Why me?" we might ask, "What is this teaching me?" When something joyful arrives, instead of clinging, we might ask, "How can I share this?" In this way, wisdom transforms the meaning of arrivals from arbitrary accidents into opportunities for awakening. At its deepest level, wisdom reveals the emptiness of all phenomena. Emptiness, or shunyata, does not mean nothingness, but rather the absence of independent existence. Everything arises dependent on causes and conditions. Nothing exists on its own. This insight shatters the illusion of separateness that fuels so much suffering. When we see that everything is interdependent, we recognize that the reason things arrive in our lives is not isolated to us, but connected to the whole. The food we eat arrives because of the farmer, the rain, the sun, the earth, the transport systems, and countless beings. A word of kindness arrives because of the generosity of another, shaped by their own conditions. Even our suffering arrives not in isolation, but as part of a vast web of interbeing. To see this is to live with humility and reverence. Wisdom also reveals the impermanent and illusory nature of the self. We often believe that life's arrivals happen to a fixed, solid me. But Buddhism teaches that the self is a collection of aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness that arise and pass away. The self is a process, not an entity. When we see this, we stop taking arrivals so personally. A harsh word does not wound a fixed self. It arises in consciousness and passes. A joy does not belong to a permanent self. It is an experience that comes and goes. This insight dissolves much of the suffering that comes from clinging and aversion. The reason everything arrives in this light is to reveal the truth of non-self and to free us from the illusion of permanence. But wisdom is not only philosophical, it is practical and lived. It manifests in how we respond to life's arrivals. When anger arises, wisdom allows us to pause and see its impermanence. When fear arises, wisdom reminds us that it too will pass. When joy arises, wisdom encourages us to savor it without clinging. In this way, wisdom guides us to live with balance and equanimity. Every arrival becomes a chance to practice, to embody insight, to live with awareness. One of the most powerful expressions of wisdom in Buddhism is the teaching of the middle way. The middle way avoids the extremes of indulgence and denial, clinging and aversion, nihilism and eternalism. It teaches us to walk a path of balance, where we recognize impermanence without despair, and where we embrace life without attachment. When we live by the middle way, we see that everything arriving in our lives has its place within this balance. Too much pleasure teaches us not to cling. Too much pain teaches us patience. Success teaches us humility, and failure teaches us resilience. The middle way reveals that every arrival has a role in shaping our wisdom. Meditation is the direct cultivation of wisdom. In meditation, we observe the mind and body, seeing directly the arising and passing of phenomena. We notice that thoughts arrive unbidden and dissolve on their own. We see that sensations arise and fade. We witness the mind's tendency to cling, to resist, to judge. In this direct observation, we realize that everything is impermanent, everything is conditioned, everything is empty of fixed self. This realization is not intellectual, but experiential. It transforms how we live. When we return to daily life, we carry this insight with us, seeing that every arrival, whether pleasant or unpleasant, is part of the great unfolding of reality. Wisdom also teaches us to embrace not knowing. Often we demand clear reasons for everything that happens. We want to explain suffering, to control outcomes, to predict the future. But true wisdom recognizes the limits of understanding. The web of causes and conditions is vast, too vast for any mind to fully grasp. There will always be mystery. Wisdom does not eliminate mystery, but learns to live with it peacefully. It teaches us to trust that even when we cannot see the reasons, there are reasons embedded in interdependence. This trust brings calm. We stop demanding certainty and instead rest in the openness of not knowing. In this openness, we discover freedom. From the perspective of wisdom, even death arrives for a reason. Death is not the end, but the natural culmination of impermanence. It reminds us of the preciousness of life, of the urgency of practice, of the need to cultivate compassion now. Death strips away illusions of permanence and forces us to confront what truly matters. In this way, death itself is a teacher, one of the greatest teachers, reminding us to live fully and wisely. The reason death arrives is not to punish, but to awaken. Wisdom also transforms our relationships. When we see others through the lens of wisdom, we no longer cling to unrealistic expectations. We recognize that just like us, they are impermanent, conditioned, and subject to suffering. We see that their actions arise from causes and conditions, many of which we cannot see. This insight softens judgment and nurtures compassion. Instead of reacting with anger or resentment, we ask, what conditions gave rise to this behavior? Instead of clinging to illusions of permanence, we cherish the moments we share. Thus, wisdom deepens our connections, making them more authentic and compassionate. In a world filled with conflict, division, and greed, wisdom is urgently needed. It reminds us that we are not separate, that our fates are intertwined, that our actions have consequences. It encourages us to act not out of ignorance or fear, but out of clarity and care. When we live with wisdom, everything that arrives in our collective life, economic crises, ecological challenges, social upheavals, becomes an invitation to awaken collectively. These challenges arrive to show us the consequences of our collective actions and to urge us toward greater harmony with the earth and with one another. Ultimately, wisdom leads us toward liberation. Liberation, or nirvana, is the cessation of suffering, the end of clinging and aversion, the freedom that comes from seeing reality as it truly is. On this path, everything that arrives is part of the journey toward awakening. Each joy, each sorrow, each moment of confusion or clarity is a step on the path. Nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless. The deeper reason behind every arrival is to guide us toward freedom. To cultivate wisdom is to live with eyes wide open. It is to see the beauty and the sorrow of life with equal clarity. It is to accept impermanence without despair, to embrace interdependence without fear, to face death without denial. It is to live with humility, knowing that we are part of a vast web of causes, and with courage, knowing that our actions matter. Wisdom transforms life from a series of random events into a coherent path of awakening. In this light, everything truly does arrive for a reason, and that reason is always pointing us toward liberation. And so, as we close this reflection, let us remember that wisdom is not distant or abstract. It is present in every breath, every thought, every encounter. Life is always offering us teachings. The question is whether we are willing to listen. When we cultivate wisdom, we listen deeply. We recognize the lessons hidden in joy and sorrow, in gain and loss, in life and death. We live with calm, not because life is easy, but because we see its meaning, and in that meaning we find freedom. If you have followed these reflections with an open heart, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you help sustain the sharing of wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness that can nurture inner calm in your own life and in the lives of others. Together we can walk this path of awakening, recognizing that everything arriving in our lives, every joy, every sorrow, every breath, is here for a reason, guiding us toward peace.